Thanks, Andrew. Well, good evening, everyone. We've got a big show tonight. I sat down with opposition leader Peter Dutton this afternoon, and we've seen Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong succumb to the green left politics and allow racists and aggressive protesters to call the shots in this country. Well, Peter Dutton says if he's Prime Minister, he would order the police chiefs to use laws available to them to crack down on activists and others committing hate crimes.
The police chiefs would understand very clearly that my government would have zero tolerance for anti-Semitic conduct in our country. It would send a very clear message to others that the conduct would not be tolerated and that people would be arrested and prosecuted through the courts.
And Peter Dutton has also criticised Penny Wong for harming Australia's international reputation. He says Wong and Albanese are still living in their student politics days.
I think they're still, frankly, living their university campus lives. And it's time for them to grow up, because Penny Wong has made a catastrophic mistake, which I think has harmed our international reputation and certainly significantly damaged our relationship with Israel.
My exclusive sit-down with Peter Dutton coming up. Well, former federal Labor MP Michael Danby says there is something seriously wrong with the government under Wong and Albanese when criticism about Israel comes so easily, but there's basically silence on China.
Penny Wong and Albo shout and bully at the tiny democracy Israel in the Middle East, but they're pussycats when it comes to China.
And what he says is true. Albanese did not say a word to Chinese President Xi Jinping when his army injured our Navy divers with a sonar attack. Yet Albanese goes over the top in attacking Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, even though he unreservedly apologised and committed to a full inquiry into the death of an Australian aid worker in a war zone. And now there are revelations tonight that Chinese spies have targeted a top Australian security research institute, ASPI, that the Albanese government is considering defunding. Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Paterson says it's a scandal that ASPI's funding could be stripped by Labor.
If confirmed, it does indicate what we all know, which is that ASPI is a favoured target of the Chinese Communist Party and its agencies, because ASPI has exposed some of the horrendous conduct of the Chinese government over the recent years, in particular its human rights abuses in Xinjiang, but also its behaviour in Hong Kong, in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, across the Taiwan Straits, even in our own democracy. I mean, ASPI research has been globally influential for an Australian think tank, has changed the conversation about the West's relationship with China in a positive way, because it's brought reality to the eyes of all of us. So the prospect that the Albanese government is going to strip funding away from ASPI, I think, is a scandal, and as we know, was a demand of the Chinese government on the list of 14 demands.
But it's not just ASPI that's vulnerable under Labor. Even our intelligence community has been excluded. You'll recall that I reported that the heads of ASIO and ASIS were kicked out of the National Security Committee of Cabinet. ASIO head Mike Burgess and ASIS chief Kerry Hartland are no longer permanent members of Albanese's National Security Committee in an absurd move. Well, Peter Dutton told me this afternoon that it's a move he simply can't understand.
I just don't think it's front of mind for them. I don't think they have the relationships with the intelligence community. They've excluded the intelligence chiefs from the National Security Committee.
Okay, that exclusive interview is coming up tonight on the show. Dutton does not mince his words. He is very strong on the Prime Minister and Penny Wong. And it is very clear that this Albanese government is deprioritising national security. And Penny Wong and Albanese appear to be favouring our enemies and treating dictators with kid gloves while smashing our long-term bipartisan allies. It's a confused and bewildering foreign policy agenda that has serious national security experts shaking their heads. Now, first tonight, we're going to look at this grotesque overreaction, Tony Abbott's astonishing attack on the Morrison government's COVID response. That's coming up. Also, breaking news this afternoon, the fallout from Channel 7's Bruce Lerman interview claims another scalp. Tonight, the executive producer of Spotlight appears to be out of a job, but is the bloodletting at Channel 7 over? Also, 3 sons and 4 grandchildren of a Hamas leader are killed by an Israeli strike. You can see the moment that the Hamas leader who planned the October 7 attacks was perfectly happy to kill Israeli babies, children, women, teenagers and men, learns that his own sons, who are Hamas fighters, have been killed. We now have to ask whether this will finally cause the terrorist group to retreat. Now, as I said, that breaking news this afternoon that Spotlight boss Mark Llewellyn has reportedly left Channel 7 after the bombshell allegations about the measures that were used, allegedly, to secure the exclusive interview with Bruce Lerman. Well, former producer Taylor Auerbach told the federal court that company money was allegedly spent on sex workers and cocaine, and he claimed some of the expenses were even reimbursed by the network, a claim that Channel 7 denies. The Australian reports this afternoon that Mark Llewellyn is understood to have handed in his company's security pass on Wednesday night and will not be returning. However, Mark Llewellyn has posted a picture to his social media saying that he's out of town with friends on a long-planned rugby trip. So no comment about his departure from 7, even though the news had broken when he posted this. He's saying he is out on the town with friends on a long-planned rugby trip. Now, funnily enough, Bruce Lerman himself had liked this social media post. All right, joining me now is Perth Mayor Basil Zemplis and Sky News host Danica DiGiorgio. Welcome to you both. Danica, after allegations of drugs and prostitutes that Taylor Auerbach claims at least some of the money was reimbursed by Channel 7 to Bruce Lerman, of course, 7 and Lerman deny that. But with this sort of allegation going to the very culture at 7 News' investigative program, it was very likely that the executive producer who was in charge of all of this, even if he might have been unaware of the ins and outs, it was very likely he would end up losing his job.
I do believe that would be the case, Sharri. As you said, though, I mean, these allegations have been out in the media now for the last few weeks. And given that Mark Llewellyn's name has come up multiple times in court when Taylor Auerbach took the stand, that you would have to think, though, that that his position did become highly untenable. But I mean, over the last week or so, we've heard multiple allegations, again, many that which Channel 7 have denied. But ultimately, the sword appears to have fallen this afternoon, Sharri.
Basil, you do work for Channel 7. You have done for a long time. Obviously, I don't want to make you lose your job here, but has it been a tough week for the company?
30 years I've been with Channel 7 and now 7 West Media. I'm very proud to have been and had such a long association with 7 West Media. All of those allegations you've correctly identified have been denied. I'm not speaking out of school when I say that late last week there was an all-staff email from our CEO, James Warburton, who categorically denied those courtroom allegations and also said that they were appalled by the nature of those allegations and, most importantly, that they do not reflect the culture of Channel 7 or 7 West Media. And as someone who's been with the organisation for a long time, I can back that up. Like any organisation, there are times when not everything goes exactly according to plan, but there are many, many fine people at Channel 7 that I call colleagues. It is a very resilient organisation. We always, and the organisation has always strived to do its very best, and I'm sure sure that as these allegations finally come to their conclusion in court, all of what I've just said and what has also been said by the CEO of the Seven Network will be proven to be what is indeed the case. I will also say, though, this has been a tough week for Seven in lots of ways. I and many of my colleagues have lost one of our trusted colleagues and friends in Nathan Templeton.
Yes,
I worked with him at many Olympic Games and on lots of other sporting telecasts, and it puts it all into perspective. But Seven is a resilient organisation, and we will fight through this for sure.
Yeah, no, very sad news then. We, of course, our hearts go out to his family and the broader family at Channel 7 Sunrise in the Morning Show. Now let's have a look at the Prime Minister today. Anthony Albanese was in Brisbane, where he unveiled his vision for a future made in Australia to the Queensland Media Club. This comes as Peter Dutton slammed Labor for failing manufacturing businesses. Basil, just going to start with you again on this. What did you actually think of Albanese's manufacturing proposal today?
Well, it's ambitious, if you like, but it is a touch confusing. And I think there's lots of people who would far prefer the Prime Minister to just concentrate on the basics. Get the tax settings right. Make sure that inflation is under control. Encourage manufacturing in other ways and, in a sense, be there to assist and get out of the road. It was a little confusing. There is some ambition to it. But again, you would say to greatly support manufacturing in Australia, let's just try and get the basics right, get the basic government settings correct, and manufacturing will flow. So I'm not sure that it is going to be especially well received, particularly by industry who need those settings to be right.
Yeah. Look, NDIS has also been in the spotlight in a big way this week. Danica, multiple scandals day after day, allegations that money was misspent on criminals. There's now a review, but there are providers who are concerned that this review will mean that they might be cut out or forced to jump through hoops in order to be registered. What do you think about this?
Look, Sharri, the problem with the NDIS right now is it's a behemoth, okay? It was initially designed for the most severely disabled Australians, and now in terms of total cost, it has outstripped the cost of Medicare and is coming up to outstripping the cost of defence. And simply, it's just blown out. Half of the problem with this is the testing scheme. Well, it's not means tested altogether, but a lot of the participants on the NDIS, and this is what has been raised by that review, is that people are on the schemes about 45% for autism, and so concerns have been raised about what that now looks like. But we can't go past the rorts, we can't go past all of these issues that have been coming up, but it just gets to the heart of it, Sharri, that it has grown from what was meant to be helping the most people in need to now this giant scheme which has blown out. Now, we do have that review, and Bill Shorten did last week try and introduce some legislation, but it's very, very difficult to implement, and I can't see how it's going to be fixed unless this scheme becomes means tested.
Yeah,
and it's important to say, isn't it, $42 billion it's going to cost this year. $42 billion. That is an extraordinarily large sum of money. It's not dead. It's not terminal yet, but it is very, very sick. And as Danica said, and Sharri, as you've mentioned, I mean, the NDIS is now something that it was never really intended to be. It was a noble beginning. It made sense. It was trying to help our most vulnerable. Now it is out of control. Some of our most vulnerable are still helped, that's for sure. But there are industries that have spun off from industries that have spun off from industries that are involved with the NDIS, and this is not what was intended.
Yeah, all right. Let's have a look at another controversial topic this week. We've seen that there are calls for a review of Australia's gender services. This is after, in the United Kingdom, there was a similar review of their systems. It found that children, and that's the key word there, children, had been let down. Psychiatrist Dr. Andrew Amos, who called for a review here in Australia, he told The Australian today that there's no question that in order to have high quality medical services, you need to be doing adequate oversight. He says we call it clinical evidence, and the first step is to record what you're doing, report what you're doing, and then review what the results have been. None of that's happening with gender services in Australia. Basil, this is a very controversial topic. We're not seeing any government leadership on it, but it's something that worries parents, especially of young and teenage children.
Well, I think what we can do, it is a complex and difficult topic, we understand, and it is a topic that often polarises. But if we just look at it, if you like, from that textbook approach about what should be done and how services typically should be organised, the checklist that should be in place, the sorts of things that should happen. We've just clearly seen them indicated there. We can all follow that. If those things are not being done, if the procedures and protocols are not in place for this to be conducted in a thorough and logical way, then we know that there has to be an element of people being let down, because it is simply not up to the standard that we would either expect or have come to expect previously. That's a pretty simple checklist, isn't it? Are those things being done? If they are, great. If they're not, then alarm bells would be ringing and should be ringing.
Danica, one of the things that so worries parents is how little control they have in this area. You know, decisions can be made about their own child without even their input, or when a decision has gone so far down the track that it's too late to have any say. And if they disagree, then, you know, they're labelled some unhelpful terms.
Well, it's a complete minefield for parents, right? How are parents supposed to navigate what has become a very, very tricky issue? I think it was only in the last couple of weeks the ACT was looking to implement plans, or has implemented plans, where a child no longer needs to get permission from their parents to undergo, to take the puberty blockers, which I just think is astounding. We look at what's happened in the UK, in England. They've already banned puberty blockers for children under a certain age. But the issue, Sharri, is debate in this country is completely stifled on it. We saw Senator Alex Antic in South Australia. It was only in the last few weeks he tried to bring up a debate on it, and it was shut down. Nobody wants to have a debate because they risk offending a minority. But the reality is it's a debate that this country needs to have, and following other countries like what's going on in England at the moment.
Or if not a debate, at least a public inquiry where that best and the latest medical information is heard. Now, we've seen that today there are serious concerns among United States intelligence agencies that an Iranian strike on Israel could be imminent. Even Joe Biden, the US president, made this public today. He vows that America's commitment to Israel's security was ironclad when it comes to Iran, and he warned Tehran not to carry out the attack. Basil, this is what really bugs me, to be polite, about Joe Biden. His language for months now has indicated that he doesn't want to support Israel. Well, that only emboldens Iran. And now US intelligence, or Five Eyes intelligence, probably Israeli intelligence, has discovered that an attack from Iran, probably on a military base in Israel, could be imminent. Well, you know, why does he think Iran is emboldened? Because of his own weakness.
We talk so often, don't we, about the language of leaders and how important it is to send a message, to set the tone, to make sure that everybody understands what the global position is. And Joe Biden has indeed, as Sharri, you pointed out, has exactly opened the door to this sort of thinking and rhetoric, if you like, from Iran. And the fact that now he is highlighting it as if some form of defensive move or defensive measure via his own statements. But really what it does is highlight the absolutely diabolical situation that we have. And to now have Iran either genuinely contemplating or being spoken about contemplating some form of attack on Israel shows that what took place late last year, that incredible and unlawful and undignified and savage attack on Israel, this is where we are now. And that's why the world has had to step in and support Israel the way they have, because not to do so can result in these drastic next steps. And really, our hearts are all in our mouths when we hear that sort of rhetoric.
Yeah, absolutely terrifying. And we know there have been reports in credible newspapers like the Wall Street Journal that Iran helped plan the October 7 attack. Well, if it attacked directly, we know what type of weapons it has. It is literally a terrifying prospect. Danica DiGiorgio, Basil Zemplis, thank you both very much for your time this evening. Now, coming up, my exclusive interview with Peter Dutton. He accuses the Prime Minister and Penny Wong of still living in their militant university campus days, which is now, he says, ruining our international reputation. He also lays out his plan, if he were Prime Minister, to order the police chiefs to charge the perpetrators of hate crimes. My interview with the man who could be our next PM right after the break. Welcome back. Well, we know that the way Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong and their senior team have handled Australia in the wake of the terror attack across the other side of the world in the Middle East 6 months ago has only fanned the flames of anti-Semitism here. Instead of showing leadership after the October 7 attacks and making sure there was social cohesion in our country, making sure the conflict a world away didn't play out on Australian streets, they have only made it worse. Every day with their rhetoric, they are putting Australian lives, Australian Jewish lives here at risk. Well, we know that Peter Dutton and the Coalition have a very different approach, but I wanted to know what it would be like, how Peter Dutton would handle this crisis if he wins the next election. So I sat down with him today. He could be the next PM. What would he do about this crisis we're seeing on our streets? Here's that interview. Peter Dutton, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure, Sharri. Thank you.
If you were Prime Minister, what would you do to try and solve this anti-Semitism crisis that we have in Australia?
I think there are two things that we can do immediately. One is that the police chiefs would understand very clearly that my government would have zero tolerance for anti-Semitic conduct in our country. It would send a very clear message to others that the conduct would not be tolerated and that people would be arrested and prosecuted through the courts according to the rule of law. Secondly, we need to mandate the teaching of the Holocaust story and lessons, because I think they're being lost on this generation. I think we need to mandate that every school child should visit a Holocaust museum, again, to understand one of the most significant parts of world history, that 6 million Jews were gassed, tortured, lost their lives, and that they should have no tolerance in their own lives, in their own communities, amongst their own friendship and social groups for anti-Semitic comment. And I think that would go some way to changing the debate. As I said in my speech last night, I think the Prime Minister missed his opportunity, as John Howard grasped in 1996 with the tragedy of the Port Arthur disaster, where it was a moment of national significance. John Howard spoke out against it. He stood up for our country and he changed the course of history. I think through Anthony Albanese's weakness and his decision not to speak up against the actions that we saw on October 9, I think that has allowed a level of anti-Semitism in our country to flourish, and as a result, people are living with fear at the moment, and that pains me, and we need to bring it to an end and allow all Australians, regardless of their faith or beliefs, to live a free life in the best country in the world.
Do you think Labor seems to be capitalising on this war in the Middle East, and in doing so is actually causing ancient hatreds to emerge in Australia?
Well, the short answer is yes, and I don't think there's any dispute about that. The Labor Party has a particular internal dynamic where they've got the left and the right split on the issue, predominantly supporting a position against Israel, and I think that's been evident from day one. I think the Prime Minister missed a massive opportunity to show leadership when we saw the protests at the Sydney Opera House. He abrogated that responsibility, and I think it's allowed a level of anti-Semitism to take place. It's obviously risen very quickly, but I think there is a message that was sent from the Prime Minister, whether he meant to or not, that there is a level of acceptance of some protests that included anti-Semitism. And now we've got what I think is a government that's trying to play to a particular segment of the population by taking a stance in relation to Israel at the moment, which is acrimonious. It's against our national interests. And I think the most appalling part of their stance is that it is for crass political purposes, and they're sacrificing our national interest and the interests of Australians of Jewish heritage as a result.
And potentially risking national security even here. I mean, we know from Mike Burgess that there is a possible terror level, but you never hear the government speak about these threats.
No, because I just don't think it's front of mind for them. I don't think they have the relationships with the intelligence community. They've excluded the intelligence chiefs from the National Security Committee, which, I sat on the National Security Committee for 6 years, and I can tell you there are many discussions in relation to defence that ASIO could contribute to, that the Australian Federal Police could comment about in relation to a migration matter, in relation to a people smuggling matter. Something from defence would be contributed, and they've excluded all of that. And I don't understand why, because the threat, as you rightly point out, hasn't gone away. And as we see the temperature escalating in the Middle East, if Iran takes action against Israel, if there is a broader conflict within Europe, then that has the potential to play out here domestically. And as we know, shamefully, schools in our country at the moment within the Jewish community have guards outside because they're worried about attacks on preschoolers and children. It's how you could not take national security seriously at this point in time is beyond me.
You know, risking children's lives and instead prioritising politics and winning some votes from the Greens. Do you think the Albanese government should be worrying more about issues like youth crime in Queensland and Alice Springs before they try and lecture Israel about how to defeat the terrorists in the Middle East?
Well, I think Alice Springs is a particular case study of this Prime Minister. The Prime Minister spent more time at the tennis than he did in Alice Springs. There are people in Alice Springs who are treated as second-class citizens. They're the people who own the stores, who own the homes that have been broken into, who are the owners of the motor vehicles that have been stolen, wrecked or put on fire. And yes, I think you should get your own house in order before you start lecturing others. And I think when we look at the youth crime issue, we've had a bill on the table now. We've said that we want to work with the government in a bipartisan way to demand that Meta and the other companies take down that content which glorifies or justifies some of these crimes where cars are being stolen. They're doing it so that they can post the video because that gives them kudos with their friends. Starve them of that opportunity and take away the motivation or the interest that they've got in stealing the car in the first place.
They're very quick to take down misinformation when it related to the voice, though.
Of course.
Now, the Prime Minister this morning said that there could be a Hamas-free Gaza. Just a short time later, we then heard the leading Palestinian delegate in Canberra say that Hamas was very much a part of the future of Gaza. It was a philosophy, it's entwined in the population. Do you think the Prime Minister and Penny Wong are naive in their thinking?
No, I don't, because I think they've cobbled together a policy which, as we said before, is all about trying to win votes from the Greens, and it's about trying to hold inner city seats, and they're putting that objective ahead of the national interests. And so I think that's what is at play here. If Penny Wong was making a serious contribution to the debate and had a serious proposition to put in relation to statehood for the Palestinian territory, surely she would have spoken with members of the community here to understand their thinking and to bounce off them her idea. But it's clear that none of that happened because, as you point out, the representative here in Australia is at complete odds with where Penny Wong claims to be. I think they're still, frankly, living their university campus lives. And it's time for them to grow up because Penny Wong has made a catastrophic mistake which I think has harmed our international reputation and certainly significantly damaged our relationship with Israel.
Last night in your speech you spoke about how we do have anti-vilification laws, we do have anti-harassment, anti-incitement laws, both federally and at state levels, and yet we haven't seen any leaders actually use them. There have been virtually no arrests in the past 6 months since October 7. What do you think is going on here? Why is there this reluctance from law enforcement to actually use the laws that are available to them?
I suspect the upper echelons of the police service, particularly in New South Wales and in Victoria are taking what they believe is to be the lead from their police minister, from their Prime Minister, and that's the problem that we've got. Now, if an action is brought and a matter goes before the court and there is a finding of guilt, it's appealed, say all the way to the High Court, and it's found to be unconstitutional or there's a problem with the law, then the law can be amended at that point. Whilst ever we allow these people to get away with the doxing, with the threatening behaviour, with the boycotting, and with the general anti-Semitic behaviour otherwise, it will continue and it will flourish. And if we don't have a zero tolerance, then I just think it's a green light. And for the Prime Minister to abrogate his basic responsibility to people of Jewish faith, but in turn, and as a result of that abrogation to all Australians, I think he fails his first duty.
We've seen 3 boats arrive on our shores since November. In the past, there have been boats that have come, but they've been intercepted at sea. That doesn't seem to be happening at the moment. Are you concerned that under Labor we could start to see an influx?
Well, I'm very concerned because I think if Labor allows this problem to flourish again, they're going to find it very hard to get it back under control. They have abandoned Operation Sovereign Borders. The Prime Minister talks about Operation Sovereign Borders as if it's the same policy that it was under the coalition. It's not. And what the people smugglers take from the change and the watering down to Operation Sovereign Borders under Labor is that there's a green light for them and there's a business opportunity again. As we know, at every Labor Party conference, he's argued against Operation Sovereign Borders and against tough border protection policies. And I think the people smugglers can see that on this front that he's probably not telling the truth as well.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of industry groups speak out and complain about the fact that they're being made to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, just to have a look at government policy. When it came down to Tanya Plibersek's nature positive plan, people couldn't even bring their mobile phones into the room to have a look at this detail. Do you think this is quite absurd secrecy from a government, and is it designed to shut down public criticism?
There's no doubt it's designed to shut down criticism, it's designed to divide and conquer. The Teals were elected on a platform of transparency and openness and would support this government in a minority government at the next election, but don't say anything about the way in which the government's conducting themselves now. I've never seen anything like it, where you've got religious leaders who are dealing with the government, negotiating with the government at the moment on the religious discrimination bill. The Archbishop or the Imam or the Rabbi is required to sign a non-disclosure agreement, can't go back to their church or synagogue and speak to their advisors about what it is that they've read or seen. Some of them are seeing part of the bill, others are seeing the entire bill. Some people, it seems, have a hotline to the Prime Minister, but not others. And there's nothing commercial in confidence that is being discussed here. There's nothing of national security importance that's being discussed here. And it's not a market-sensitive position that, or a national security position that would otherwise warrant that. So I think it's plain and simple a technique that's been drafted by Mark Dreyfus to try and stop public scrutiny and criticism of where the government is at. It's the case in relation to the nature positive bill, as it is in relation to a couple of other areas where the government's negotiating at the moment. And it's a lack of transparency because the government's got bad policies, which frankly, again, are all targeted at trying to please those Green voters as opposed to what's in the best interests of our country.
Yeah. Right, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sharri. Thanks,
Peter.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.
All right, well, after the break, Tony Abbott's astonishing attack on the Morrison government's COVID response. He said they went too far. We'll bring you his comments after the break. Plus, a journalist who uncovered Chinese spies trying to attack one of our top research institutes will join me. He has the messages from the Chinese spies. That's after the break. Welcome back. Well, some breaking news now. I can exclusively reveal that the Israeli Foreign Ministry opposes the move by Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese to appoint a special advisor to oversee their investigation into the death of aid worker Zomi Frankham. My sources tell me the sense in the Foreign Ministry in Israel is that there's no place for Australia to do such an unprecedented move, that Israel can conduct its own investigation without interference from other countries. Now, I'm told the Israeli Defence Department could still agree to Australia's oversight in their investigation, but I have confirmed that the Foreign Ministry in Israel opposes it. That breaking news right there. Now, we're going to coming up in the show, we're going to come to Tony Abbott's comments criticising what he says is an overreaction from the Morrison government. But now let's go to these leaked messages from Chinese-sponsored hackers that show they were hired to target the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. The think tank is often critical of the Chinese Communist Party and its foreign interference and aggression in our region. ASPI is such an irritant to China that China included it on its list of 14 grievances to Australia in 2020. Now, the coalition government would never have dreamed of giving in to any of China's demands, but now, under Albanese, its funding could be on the chopping block. The head of Albanese's department, his hand-picked appointee, Glyn Davis, has announced a review of think tanks, including ASPI. Leading that review, Peter Varghese. Now, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet has defended the unusual decision to put Varghese in charge of a review of government funding for think tanks, given he already chairs a separate think tank called AsiaLink. The government told me that all conflicts of interest, real or perceived, had been disclosed. Now, ASPI Executive Director Justin Bassey told the journalist James King, who uncovered the plans to hack it, that this revelation is a sad reminder that the Chinese Communist Party will try to suppress any source of legitimate criticism. So now it seems that the Albanese government may acquiesce to China's demands to defund ASPI, and that is the concern. Now, joining me now, the journalist who wrote this story in the Nightly, James King. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks,
well
Sharri.
done on this extraordinary investigative report. Can you tell me about some of these leaked messages that you obtained from the state-sponsored hackers who discussed targeting ASPI?
Unlike the hackers sponsored by other foreign governments, those of the People's Republic of China tend to be more fluid. The hacking groups that the Chinese government engages are less organised. One of the implications of that is that they tend to find their own way to each other and they tend to coalesce in their own groups. On this occasion, they formed a group, they came together, and I found my way to that group where they were openly discussing their work and their targets. They appear to have successfully compromised a South Korean power plant. And
So they were successful in hacking a South Korean power plant, but there's no evidence that they did actually succeed in hacking ASPI.
correct,
They were just discussing it.
correct.
You also got hold of some amazing internal Chinese National Security Agency directives. What were they saying in these directives from the intelligence agencies in China?
So these hackers working for the Chinese government were sharing these documents to each other, seeking each other's assistance on hacking operations. And the documents quite clearly directed the hackers, as per Article 7 of China's national security law, to support the Chinese government's hacking operations and to hack the targets of the Chinese government. And ASPI is one of those.
And that security law that you reference, I mean, that's the one that has the intelligence agency so concerned about with TikTok and other Chinese-owned companies, because anything that gathers private user data, those companies could be compelled to provide it to the government. I mean, it's literally in their law.
That's right. And it's those same orders that I published that could easily be sent to a ByteDance employee, the TikTok parent company, requesting that information of Australian user data from ByteDance employees in China.
Now, ASPI doesn't hold classified information, it doesn't hold secrets, but there are former intelligence officials who work there and do research projects. The work does end up in government agencies. Why would it be such a target of China?
ASPI does a range of work, much of which the Chinese government has repeatedly expressed over years it does not like. One of those has been its extensive research over a number of years into the abuses of ethnic minorities in China, Turkic Muslims, including the Uyghurs, where Human Rights Watch estimates more than 1 million people are held in camps across China. It's been ASPI's research in this space that has brought enormous attention to the issue. And ASPI routinely publishes reports pointing to online foreign influence operations of the Chinese governments. And it's that disruption that the Chinese government appears to dislike.
Yeah, very interesting how Penny Wong never seems interested in those poor souls who are in the concentration camps in Xinjiang, but you know, we hear her criticising Israel every day. I'm not expecting you to comment on that. I'm commenting on that. Just before you go, you also broke a fascinating story about a Canberra cafe that services spies, diplomats, intelligence agency insiders, and it's actually owned by the spouse of a Chinese politician who'd been honoured by Xi Jinping himself.
Yes, and that spouse was honoured in the People's Great Hall of China 3 months before Xi Jinping hosted Anthony Albanese in that same hall. Now, the husband became a Chinese politician in the same month that his spouse became a majority shareholder of that cafe, and a former senior intelligence community senior executive who was frequenting that cafe during that ownership was unaware and shouted "what" over the phone when I told him the news.
Fascinating stuff. You're doing amazing work. Thanks so much for your time, James.
Thanks, Sharri.
Now, coming up, Labor's deportation laws are under attack, accused of being ill-conceived and rushed, and more on that breaking news that Israel has opposed, or at least the Foreign Ministry have opposed the move by Labor to appoint a special advisor. Plus, we're going to play you that audio of Tony Abbott saying that the Morrison government was over the top on the COVID inquiry. Matt Canavan and Jenna Clark will join me next. Welcome back. Well, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott has slammed his own party's COVID-19 response on a podcast. Have a listen.
I think we drastically overreacted to a relatively mild pandemic. It certainly wasn't Ebola. It certainly wasn't the Black Death. It wasn't even Spanish flu. And our countries went through those in the 1950s and the 1960s without closing schools and businesses, without vaccine mandates.
All right, National Senator Matt Canavan and Associate Editor of The Oz, Jenna Clark, join me now. Matt, look, initially the feeling was that the death rate with COVID was going to be quite high, but do you think Tony Abbott's right?
Well, look, first of all, I think Tony underlines why we need a proper inquiry here, a Royal Commission. That's what the Prime Minister promised us. He hasn't delivered. And given Treasury's revealed that more than $500 billion of your money was spent in response to COVID, the least we could have is a proper inquiry, not to mention, of course, all the lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, all of the draconian response that occurred needs to be reviewed. Look, secondly, I think there's no doubt that there was, in hindsight, an overreaction. In my view, though, there were really two pandemics. There was the original pandemic and original virus, which was a serious virus, and especially for elderly people was a real risk. And then we ended up with Omicron, and by the time Omicron came along, it wasn't as serious as we feared, but we still were kept or left the legacy of a lot of restrictions for at least some months beyond that. So, look, it needs to be properly reviewed. No one needs to get shot for anything that was done during a pandemic. It was a difficult time, but we need to reflect on what was done, and we need to be honest about what mistakes were made.
Yeah. Look, it's hard to even think now, Jenna, that there were months when no one left the house or got out of their pyjamas.
Yeah, look, waves in West Australia, and I was locked in for like 2 years, and I really felt for people that had family and loved ones on the other side of the Nullarbor. Look, I think Matt's right. Hindsight is a beautiful thing, but you also take into account what Mr. Abbott was saying, and I just think we need an absolute thorough review into the way that we handled COVID. But of course, as you have been saying for years now, we also need to figure out the origins of this hideous disease.
Oh, yes, but no one else seems to care about that. Matt Canavan, you will be celebrating today, I'm sure, because you're Julian Assange's #1 fanboy over there. And Joe Biden has confirmed that he's considering Australia's request to release this, I don't even know what to call him, he's not a journalist, this bloke.
Right, well...
Do you have a response to Australia's request that you end Julian Assange's prosecution?
We're considering it.
Matt Canavan.
Well, as I say, I think there needs to be a little asterisk there because I'm perhaps the #1 fanboy on Sky News. I mean, in the Parliament, there's probably some bigger fanboys of Julian Assange than me on the crossbench and others that have been on this case for a long time. But look, I think the basic conclusion here is enough's enough. Whatever you think about Mr. Assange, he has served a number of years now in captivity. I mean, how much more should he be punished here? So, look, I think it's time that he is released. That's the view now of all major political parties in this country, and I hope our friends in America listen and send Julian home to be with his family.
Jenna, it does seem like sentiment in the public as well has shifted on Assange.
I don't really think the general public, look, forgive my naivety about all this, but I don't think the general public really care about Julian Assange at this point in time when they're probably just worried about cost of living pressures at home. But I don't know, I kind of saw this as a bit of an episode of Veep, Sharri, in regards to, you saw the walking cadaver that is US President Joe Biden not really comprehend what he was being asked. So I wouldn't even be surprised if he walks it back.
Yeah, you know what? I thought that as well. I thought that wasn't a serious answer. It was a quick throwaway. But, the Albanese government has been putting this on the agenda, so you never know. Now, I found this news amazing overnight that an Israeli airstrike killed 3 sons of the Hamas political leader who is responsible for October 7. There was even vision, Matt Canavan, of when he learned the news that his sons, who are also Hamas fighters before anyone feels sorry for them, that they'd been killed. What do you think of this, Matt?
Well, look, this is exactly what Israel had to do in response to October 7th. It's obviously brutal, but there had to be a brutal response to the brutality that we saw on October 7th. I mean, what is regrettable in the months since is, of course, the thousands of innocent people that have been caught up in this. These particular individuals, if what you say is true, are not innocent victims. And what we really do need to do is see Hamas defeated. The sooner that can happen, the sooner this can be over. I'm a lot more concerned now about the threats we've seen from Iran, and obviously none of us want to see this response, or a legitimate response from Israel to broaden into a wider conflict. So maybe if this sort of action will help perhaps draw a line under what's happened, and we can get to peace as soon as possible.
Yeah. Jenna, I just a little while ago revealed the breaking news that the Israeli Foreign Ministry opposes the unprecedented move by Labor to appoint a special advisor to oversee their investigation into the death of aid workers. But, we have seen a complete breakdown in the bilateral relationship between Australia and Israel.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the fact that just the Australian government even bothering to sort of send a sternly worded letter, and of course it is tragic. It's a tragedy that all of these aid workers have been caught up in this mess when they're just trying to do humanitarian work. But I think at the end of the day, when you are trying to pick up the phone to Benjamin Netanyahu, who is now a wartime leader, who has probably got bigger things to focus on at this point in time rather than reviews and things like that, it is probably understandable the Israeli government said, not right now, Albo, we're a little bit busy, but I think that definitely there will be a time for a proper review into what actually happened.
Yeah. Well, they are investigating it. Of course, it's the Foreign Ministry that's opposing it. We're still yet to hear whether Defence allows Australia's Special Advisor to have this access. Matt Canavan, Jenna Clark, love having you both on. Thank you both so much. Thank you for your company this week. I'll see you Monday at 8 o'clock, and here's Paul Murray.